Have you ever wondered if an entire operating system could be smaller than a single photo on your phone? Imagine booting a complete Linux desktop from something so tiny that most people would assume it's impossible. In a world where modern operating systems demand tens of gigabytes of storage, multiple gigabytes of RAM, and increasingly powerful hardware, there's one project that completely ignores those trends. While Windows continues to grow larger with every update and many Linux distributions now occupy several gigabytes before you've even installed your first application, one operating system quietly proves that computing doesn't have to be bloated. Today, we're looking at Tiny Core Linux in 2026, the smallest Linux distribution you can actually use. But here's the surprising part. This isn't just a technical experiment or a stripped-down recovery tool. People genuinely use Tiny Core Linux every single day. It runs on hardware that most people threw away years ago, boots in seconds, and somehow manages to provide a usable desktop experience in less space than an average MP3 song. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Tiny Core Linux continues to fascinate Linux enthusiasts, minimalists, and even professionals who need the fastest operating system possible. And trust me, some of the numbers you're about to see sound almost unbelievable until you witness them in action. Tiny Core Linux has been around for years, but in 2026 it remains one of the most unique Linux distributions ever created. Unlike mainstream Linux operating systems that try to include everything you might need, Tiny Core follows a completely different philosophy. It starts with almost nothing and allows you to build exactly the system you want. That design choice is what keeps it incredibly small. The base version of Tiny Core is measured in mere megabytes rather than gigabytes. To put that into perspective, the wallpaper included with some modern operating systems is larger than Tiny Core Linux itself. The project was created by Robert Shingledecker, who previously worked on Damn Small Linux, another famous lightweight operating system. After gaining experience building one of the smallest usable Linux distributions, he decided to push the concept even further. Instead of simply removing software to reduce size, Tiny Core was designed from the ground up around modularity. Every feature beyond the basics exists as an optional extension. That means you only install what you actually need instead of carrying thousands of unnecessary files. The first thing you'll notice when booting Tiny Core Linux is its incredible speed. Even on old hardware, the system loads astonishingly fast. On modern SSDs, boot times often feel almost instant. On older computers with mechanical hard drives, it still starts much faster than most other operating systems. That's because there simply isn't much data to load. Instead of processing gigabytes of system files, Tiny Core loads only the essentials into memory and gets straight to work. Once the desktop appears, you'll immediately notice how different it feels compared to Ubuntu, Fedora, Linux Mint, or Windows. The interface is intentionally simple. There's a lightweight window manager, a basic panel, a small application launcher, and very little visual clutter. At first glance, it might even seem unfinished, but that's exactly the point. Every icon, every background process, every animation, and every extra feature consumes resources. Tiny Core eliminates everything that isn't absolutely necessary. One of the biggest reasons people become interested in Tiny Core Linux is its astonishingly low hardware requirements. While many modern operating systems recommend at least 4 or 8 gigabytes of RAM, Tiny Core can comfortably boot with only a fraction of that. Even computers built 20 years ago can often run it surprisingly well. Machines that struggle to open a web browser under Windows suddenly feel responsive again. That alone has made Tiny Core a favorite among people who enjoy restoring vintage computers instead of sending them to electronic waste. Of course, extremely low hardware requirements don't automatically make an operating system useful. The real question is whether Tiny Core can actually perform real work. Surprisingly, the answer is yes, although with some important limitations. Out of the box, the installation is intentionally minimal. You won't find a complete office suite, video editors, programming environments, or dozens of multimedia applications waiting for you. Instead, Tiny Core includes only the tools needed to get started. From there, you decide what to add. Its package management system is unlike what many Linux users expect. Applications are downloaded as extensions rather than permanently installed in the traditional sense. You can load them into memory, mount them dynamically, or make them persistent depending on how you configure your system. This modular approach keeps the base operating system clean while giving users incredible flexibility. Need Firefox? Install only Firefox. Need LibreOffice? Add only LibreOffice. Need development tools? Download exactly those components and nothing more. Every application becomes a conscious choice rather than unnecessary baggage. This approach offers another major advantage. Because the operating system itself remains extremely small, updates are often faster and simpler. You're maintaining a compact system instead of thousands upon thousands of packages that you may never use. One feature that surprises many first-time users is that TinyCore can run entirely from RAM. Once the operating system finishes booting, it can remove the installation media completely while continuing to operate normally. Imagine booting from a USB drive, unplugging it, and still using the operating system without interruption. Since everything is running directly from memory, many operations become incredibly fast. Running entirely in RAM also reduces wear on storage devices. This makes TinyCore especially attractive for embedded systems, kiosks, industrial computers, and specialized equipment that benefits from minimizing disk writes. In situations where reliability matters more than flashy features, TinyCore becomes an excellent candidate. Security is another interesting aspect. Because the operating system contains so few components, the potential attack surface is naturally smaller than larger operating systems filled with unnecessary services. Users install only the software they actually need, reducing opportunities for vulnerabilities hiding inside unused packages. Of course, no operating system is magically immune to security risks, but minimalism can certainly help reduce complexity. Now let's address one of the biggest questions everyone asks. Can TinyCore Linux replace your everyday operating system? The honest answer depends entirely on your expectations. If your daily workflow revolves around web browsing, document editing, programming, terminal work, remote administration, lightweight media playback, or learning Linux, then yes, TinyCore can absolutely be configured for those tasks. Many users build highly customized systems tailored specifically to their needs. However, if you're expecting an experience similar to Windows 11 or a full-featured Ubuntu installation immediately after booting, you'll probably be disappointed. TinyCore assumes you enjoy building your own environment. It's more like receiving an empty workshop than buying a fully furnished house. That philosophy attracts a certain type of user. Linux enthusiasts often love complete control over their systems. Developers appreciate eliminating unnecessary software. System administrators enjoy creating specialized environments. Hobbyists use TinyCore to breathe life into aging hardware. Educational institutions sometimes deploy it for teaching Linux fundamentals, because students can clearly see how the operating system is assembled. Another fascinating use case is virtualization. Since TinyCore requires so few resources, it makes an outstanding guest operating system inside virtual machines. Developers testing software, experimenting with networking, or learning Linux commands can launch TinyCore almost instantly without consuming significant system resources. It's also popular among cybersecurity researchers and penetration testers who need compact environments for specific tasks. Because the operating system boots so quickly and remains lightweight, it's convenient for portable toolkits carried on USB drives. Speaking of USB drives, TinyCore excels as a portable operating system. You can carry an entire customized Linux environment in your pocket, boot nearly any compatible computer, and immediately have access to your familiar setup. Since the operating system itself occupies so little storage space, even older USB drives with limited capacity remain perfectly usable. Customization is where TinyCore truly shines. Every user ends up creating a different operating system because everyone installs different applications. Some build lightweight web browsing machines. Others create programming workstations. Some configure network appliances. Others transform TinyCore into multimedia systems, servers, or dedicated embedded devices. Instead of forcing everyone into the same experience, TinyCore encourages personalization from the beginning. Performance remains one of its strongest selling points. Applications launch quickly because the operating system wastes very little processing power on background tasks. Memory usage stays remarkably low. CPU utilization remains minimal during idle periods. Even modest processors feel responsive because they're not constantly overwhelmed by unnecessary services running behind the scenes. This efficiency becomes especially noticeable on older laptops. Computers abandoned because they became painfully slow under modern operating systems often regain surprising usefulness with Tiny Core installed. Suddenly, basic computing tasks become enjoyable again, rather than frustrating. There's also an environmental benefit that people rarely discuss. Extending the lifespan of existing hardware reduces electronic waste. Instead of replacing perfectly functional computers simply because modern software has become too demanding, lightweight operating systems like Tiny Core allow those machines to remain productive for years longer. Of course, Tiny Core isn't perfect. Its greatest strength is also its biggest challenge. The minimal installation means beginners may initially feel overwhelmed. Tasks that happen automatically in larger Linux distributions sometimes require manual configuration. Installing drivers, configuring networking, selecting applications, and customizing the environment involve more user participation than many newcomers expect. Documentation becomes extremely important. Fortunately, the Tiny Core community has spent years building guides, tutorials, and forums filled with helpful advice. While the community isn't nearly as large as Ubuntu's or Fedora's, it's remarkably knowledgeable and passionate about helping new users understand the operating system. Software compatibility is generally excellent because Tiny Core uses the Linux kernel and supports many familiar Linux applications. However, not every package is immediately available through its repositories, and occasionally users need alternative installation methods or additional configuration. Modern web browsers present another challenge. Today's websites consume enormous amounts of memory regardless of operating system. Tiny Core itself may use very little RAM, but opening multiple browser tabs on complex websites still requires substantial system resources. That's a limitation of the modern web rather than Tiny Core specifically. Multimedia editing also isn't Tiny Core's primary focus. While it can certainly run creative software if configured properly, users working with professional video editing, advanced 3D rendering, or intensive graphic design may prefer larger Linux distributions designed specifically for those workloads. Yet that's missing the point entirely. Tiny Core never claimed to be everything for everyone. Instead, it asks a simple question: how small can a genuinely useful operating system become? Even after years of development, that question continues inspiring both developers and users. As mainstream software grows increasingly resource-hungry, Tiny Core demonstrates that efficient computing remains possible. Another aspect worth appreciating is educational value. Building a Tiny Core system teaches users far more about Linux internals than simply clicking through automated installers. You begin understanding file systems, boot processes, package management, window managers, persistence, networking, and system configuration, because you're actively assembling those pieces yourself. For students learning Linux administration, that hands-on experience can be incredibly valuable. In enterprise environments, Tiny Core sometimes appears in specialized deployments where consistency and efficiency matter more than graphical polish. Thin clients, digital signage, monitoring stations, embedded devices, and dedicated appliances often benefit from Tiny Core's streamlined architecture. Developers creating Internet of Things projects also appreciate its lightweight nature. When hardware resources are limited, every megabyte matters. Tiny Core provides a stable Linux foundation without unnecessary overhead consuming valuable memory and storage. Looking at Tiny Core Linux in 2026, it's remarkable how little its fundamental philosophy has changed. While countless operating systems continue adding features, background services, telemetry, visual effects, artificial intelligence integrations, and increasingly complex interfaces, Tiny Core continues pursuing efficiency above everything else. That consistency is refreshing. Instead of chasing trends, it remains focused on doing one thing exceptionally well: delivering an incredibly small, incredibly fast, remarkably flexible Linux operating system. The computing industry often assumes newer software must always become larger. Tiny Core quietly challenges that assumption every single day. It proves careful engineering can accomplish remarkable things even with extremely limited resources. Perhaps the biggest lesson Tiny Core teaches isn't about Linux at all. It's about intentional design. Every component exists for a reason. Every megabyte matters. Every feature must justify its presence. That philosophy creates software that's elegant precisely because it avoids unnecessary complexity. Whether you're reviving an old computer, learning Linux, experimenting with virtualization, building embedded systems, carrying a portable operating system, or simply satisfying your curiosity, TinyCore offers an experience unlike almost anything else in modern computing. Will it replace Windows for everyone? Absolutely not. Will it replace Ubuntu for every Linux user? Probably not. But that's never been its mission. Its mission is proving that useful computing doesn't require enormous operating systems consuming endless hardware resources. And remarkably, after all these years, it continues succeeding. So the next time someone tells you modern computers need massive operating systems to be useful, remember TinyCore Linux. An operating system smaller than many smartphone photos, capable of running entirely from RAM, breathing new life into forgotten hardware, and reminding the world that efficiency is still one of the greatest achievements in software engineering. In an age obsessed with adding more, TinyCore wins by mastering less. And perhaps that's exactly why it remains one of the most fascinating Linux distributions you can install in 2026.